The Open Therapy Institute is addressing bias in mental health care. Go to our website, opentherapyinstitute.org. We have CE credit workshops about overlooked issues in the field. You can go to our workshop page and register now and become a member. And for those looking for a therapist, we match people with someone who's highly skilled and truly open. Just contact us through the contact page on the website or email us at info@opentherapyinstitute.org. Hi, I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and I'm speaking with Dr. Andrew Hartz of the Open Therapy Institute. Andrew, I had a conversation as a part of our Monday live stream that I do with some colleagues with a really interesting woman recently. And I don't know if you've seen, I should have sent you some of her interviews because she's very interesting and I'd love to get your take on her theory. I'll see if I can do it justice and sort of lay some of it out. Her name is Dr. Dani Sulikowski, and she has this theory, she's an evolutionary psychologist in Australia, and she has a theory that women are the main drivers of social collapse, societal collapse, through intrasexual competition that suppresses the reproduction of other women. And so she points to reasons why she believes this is true. And it's really quite fascinating. We have this social milieu in which a lot of people have observed that aspects of the culture that feel like they are unhealthy or dysfunctional are being driven by female conflict patterns. And you see more women in institutions, more women in education, more women on both sides of education, both in the professions, teaching, and also going to accessing higher education. And so these trends, there's been a great deal of criticism of feminism recently. And so she's kind of just taking this theory and drawing it out a little bit further and pointing to markers of societal decline that she believes are driven by these female strategies. And something that's really interesting to me is that when I've had these conversations with Dr. Sulikowski, and also I had a conversation several months back with a professor who is I don't know if this is exactly how she would describe herself, but sort of an ex-feminist. She's someone who believes that she grew up steeped in feminist teachings about female independence, about sexual freedom, and about the need to establish career over sacrificing career for family. And now in her, I guess she's a little bit past midlife, she is looking back on that with some regret and feels like these are sort of lies that were told and crafted by women for women that have actually led to loneliness and poorer outcomes, both in her personal experience and in other women's lives as she's looking at them. And something that's really interesting to me is that in these conversations, there's a great deal of viewer feedback from men. So, there's a whole range of responses. You see a lot of angry men who basically say, yeah, women are the problem. They've always been the problem. Repeal the 19th, saying women shouldn't be able to vote. And sort of like there's this real strong reaction to feeling disenfranchised or hurt by women and saying that women shouldn't be in any positions of decision making or power in society. But then you also just have a lot of men who are saying, thank you for discussing this. It's good to get a balanced take on this that's not so anti-male, that we can look at the way that fault manifests through women as well as the way that it manifests through men, because we've certainly seen that quite a bit. We've had so much criticism of masculinity and men. And so I don't know if I'm doing this argument justice in order to have a real dialogue about the theories, but I'm interested in your thoughts because I know that a lot of what you've worked on and written about are men's issues and the way that men are being impacted by social, educational, psychological trends that we've been seeing. So I'm just curious for your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, maybe what's like really I mean, it does sound overstated. I mean, not knowing the theory. I think even just talking about negative traits that are more associated with femininity, that are more common in women, that's something that's important to talk about. I mean, men and women both have positive and negative trends that are associated with each. Sometimes they're stronger and sometimes they're weaker. But I do think, not to be keep hitting the same note, but that we do have a discourse, especially at institutions like universities, where you can only say bad things about men and masculinity. You can't say good things about men and masculinity, and you can't say negative things about women and femininity. You can only say positive things. So we're left with this very distorted discourse where women are better leaders and women are stronger and more emotionally mature and more sensitive and harder workers and better parents. And men are more violent and men are worse partners and they're less emotionally mature and they're less emotionally intelligent and skilled and they have all these negative traits but we can't talk about the others. We can't talk about what men tend to do better than women, reasons, things that men and masculinity have that are of value. And we can't talk about problematic, negative trends and dynamics that are associated with women and femininity. So I think like this paradigm is like, I think we're just bashing our head against the wall with this paradigm where it's like it's clearly distorted. And when that's the paradigm, when basically you only say bad things about men, you only say good things about women, that's going to produce a lot of rage. That's going to produce a lot of conflict, a lot of alienation and hatred in people. You could buy into that paradigm and hate men, or you could feel like you're demonized by that paradigm and hate women. And it also really pulls for the same type of all or nothing thinking in response to say, actually, no, men are responsible for everything good and women only contribute negativity. It just pulls for that. It pulls for these types of fights that lead to spiraling escalations of hatred. And I think we're really seeing that. I think that like my guess is that it was more sustainable when these ideologies were more in the background. They weren't front and center socially. And there was a sense that they were temporary. I think a lot of people thought that as women achieved more equality, the more radical, harsher feminist stuff would fade. And so it was worth being patient with it, even if you didn't think it was constructive or right, because as women get more power and equality, those ideologies would presumably not be as needed and then would kind of die out. And what we kind of saw, I think, what we've seen over the past decade is actually no, when women become majority and in organizations, when they assume leadership, those that more hateful forms of those ideologies thrive even more. They don't go down. And it's like if you have a profession where men are severely underrepresented, like mental health, men are demonized more. It doesn't become like, hey, only 20% of therapists are men, or only 20% of psychologists are men, or whatever. It's like 30% or whatever. Maybe we have biases against them. It's actually like, no, now we can demonize them even more. And so I think it's totally understandable that that's going to produce this response that demonizes women in return. What's really, when it really gets controversial is when you actually start saying like, what are the negative dynamics associated with women? What are the positive ones associated with men? Like, what do we think those are? And I think we should absolutely unpack that. But the first step is just acknowledging that the discourse does need to talk about positive and negatives in each. But like I think that we're at a place where it does make sense to think about what are dynamics that women might tend to engage in that do have various costs, and what are things that men might bring to an organization that might have benefits. I think that does need to be actually like fleshed out in a real way.
I think that that's true. Do you think that it's inevitable to have sort of a pendulum swing? Is the taking things too far inevitable, or is it possible to temper the discourse so that we bring things back down to something that's really working for people better?
I think that, yeah, it requires a lot of maturity and I think it's aversive. I think it's actually like it's unpleasant. It feels bad to sit with the reality that there's positive and negative trends and dynamics in each
Mhm.
group. That's an unpleasant feeling. It's uncomfortable. It can be related to anxiety or discomfort or other things. It's not, I think I think it's at the heart of even why social media polarizes people
Mhm.
because it's less pleasant to acknowledge positive and negative in both groups than to demonize one and idealize the other. And that's why people click more on that stuff because it in the short term it feels better. And we can kind of attribute this to the algorithm or whatever it is, but I think there's a part the algorithm works because of our psychology. So it's like, is it the algorithm or is it psychology? Well, they're really just two sides of the same coin. We are attracted to all or nothing framings of things. We are not as comfortable with pros and cons talk.
Mhm.
And so I think that's why. So it's like the thing that's terrible about the moment that I think is as bad as social media, which is a cause, and I think as bad as, people's individual behavior is like, I think a lot of it is driven by institutions are totally, I think, have by and large totally abdicated their role of saying we have to have multiple viewpoints and talk about pros and cons. When that's not happening in schools, it's not happening in universities, it's not happening in professional organizations and the media, it's not happening in the entertainment and arts worlds, it's not happening in really any mainstream cultural institutions. That's really pivotal because then there's nobody holding back that kind of spiral. And so I think the only way to get back is to get institutions to recognize that the tolerating pros and cons, including on the identity politics stuff, which is where it will be the hardest to get. To get people to think in general about politics having pros and cons, most people agree with that. It's still not being implemented anywhere or
Mhm.
in very many
Mhm.
places, but most people can think it probably should be. On the identity politics stuff, it's where I think it's just as important, maybe even more important than in on other political issues. But that will face a lot more resistance because it's a lot harder for people psychologically to do.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, and when you say that it's good to go ahead and unpack some of those differences, I'm interested in doing that. And I think that
Yeah.
it's always very tricky whenever you start to describe group associations and patterns, because with all human psychology, there tends to be more variation within groups than between groups. So you're talking about sometimes characteristics that you can apply to
Yes.
men, but women have them too, and characteristics you can ascribe to women that men also demonstrate. And so to say men are like this
Yes. Yeah.
isn't
Yeah.
fair to men. It's not fair to the individual man who's hearing like, oh, men tend to be what, sexual predators or something like that. And then you've got 95% of men standing there going, what? Not me. Not That's not me.
Yes.
And when you
Right.
say women are, I don't know what the corresponding claim you could make, but I'm sure
Passive
we could make some.
aggressive.
Yeah. Then you can't say 90%, 95% on that one, so I'm not even going to try. But you probably have a
But
lot
there
of
are
women saying,
passive
I don't
aggressive
do that.
men. Men
Yeah.
can be passive aggressive.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like,
And then also we have the ways that we interact now. Social media is a very passive aggressive sort of way of
mm,
interacting with people. You're kind of hiding behind avatars and fictional personas to lash out at other people from the safety of your home. So there's kind of these ways that I think we're all being pushed culturally into certain frameworks that, anyway, I'm interested in your
yeah,
thoughts.
no, no, no. I think that's right. Yeah, and like it's really important to recognize the individual variability, and it's also like I think as if I were kind of like speaking to men in terms of reconnecting to an authentic masculinity, I think that men often look towards women for permission about what type of men they're allowed to be instead of finding it within themselves. I think that's a mistake. I think if you really listen to your heart and who you are authentically and let yourself grow and manifest who you are, it will be masculine in a way that's true to you and positive in a way that's true to you. And men are masculine in different ways. You're not every guy is a Navy SEAL, but you might not be a great Navy SEAL, but you're a great scientist or you're a great executive or you do something else that also can feel masculine in its own way. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, so tightly stereotyped. But I think that men should let themselves be who they are as men. And that is often things that society finds refreshing and I think craves. If that's directness, it's courage, it's risk-taking, it can be leadership, innovation, it can be setting frames, setting rules, keeping systems functioning. There are things that are more male type functions. A lot of what a dad does, I think this is maybe like thinking more psychoanalytically about the father's role in the family. It's, I think, becomes an ego. He performs a lot of ego functions. So he becomes he's an object that others identify with. Yeah, even partially or maybe fully and kind of look up to. And the function is a lot about doing for the family what the ego does for the psyche in a way. It's like regulating emotions, setting boundaries and frames, interfacing with reality, creating systems and structures that are functioning. And a lot of it is like not necessarily so um, it's being in that role is very containing for people, and it doesn't necessarily have to involve a lot of action. If you think about like a king in a kingdom, it's like people are kind of comforted by the fact that there's somebody in that chair
Mhm.
and it's not necessarily that the king needs to be going out and doing all these types of things all the time, but there's something that's kind of organizing about, okay, there's somebody that's doing that, and now I can focus on these, what I do. Um, and so I think but it's something that families crave, and I think people really love having that identificatory object, and somebody who's kind of responsible, if things happen, they'll figure it out. Like if there's an intruder, if you go bankrupt, if something happens, like whatever it is, they're gonna ultimately figure that out. And that can really reduce people's anxiety and provide a sense of security to them. But even if it doesn't involve a lot of active day-to-day work, there's a lot of emotional labor that goes into being strong for
Mhm.
other people and being responsible for other people. And I think one of the reasons why men might take longer to grow into adulthood is because figuring out that role and getting comfortable with it is a very heavy lift. And it's not easy to learn how to do it. And it's very taxing. Women perform a role in families that's also very taxing. And I'm not trying to say that not in any way be denigrating towards that. But there's a lot in that male role that is very hard to achieve and very hard to manage. There's a lot of competition and a lot of the brutality of the world that you're expected to shoulder, even if just symbolically. And it does provide a lot of benefit to everyone in the family, even if it's not necessarily involved in specific tasks. It just requires there's a burden there that is beneficial to people.
Mhm.
So I think there's lots of things that the male function performs that's
Mhm.
like people really, really need. They need like maybe even might be like a more controversial thing, but even thinking like sexually,
Mhm.
the way that like there's this super intensity to male sexual desire that actually is totally essential to facilitate the bonding between two people, and it's really, really needed. And we really like, but I think a lot of men might experience that kind of like, I'm worried about using the word violence because it's like gets misused in a
Mm,
postmodern way a
mm,
lot. But there is a kind of a violence to male sexual desire
mm,
that I think a lot of men stifle and feel ashamed about, rather than recognizing it that if it's channeled in the right way with your partner in a consensual relationship, obviously, but like that it's actually really indispensable at building bonding and connection between two people. And it's very valuable. And it's not something that you need to be ashamed of, but that actually like letting that manifest in an authentic and attuned way is actually really, really critical to creating the special type of bond that happens between romantic partners. But again, I think like a lot of men don't see any of the value that they're bringing. They don't see their sexuality as performing this really valuable bonding function. They see it as kind of a burdensome need that, maybe it'd be better if it wasn't there, or it's kind of selfish or something. They don't see the role of the father as something that requires a ton of work, to kind of be an object that people want to identify with and to be performing these kinds of shouldering responsibilities that they find that are hard, but are rarely named or appreciated in a direct way. And so men feel like they feel like they should be more like moms. And then if you talk to people who've been in a family where the dad tried to be a second mom, and the fact that there's no one like in charge or,
mhm,
or setting rules or setting the frame or being identificatory object, it's so dysregulating to people, and they feel like there's something missing that they need of this object they can identify with, and this figure who has this, so I think just to name some, I'm curious if there's things that you think of that related to masculinity along these
Oh,
lines.
that's super fascinating. I like that exploration of the father. And I wonder if you'll say a little bit more about the violence in the sexual relationship, because I'm wondering if do you mean sort of in aggressive impulses, or do you mean more the explosive nature of the need and desire
Yeah, and
itself?
well, I mean, I think there's a pretty normative dominant submission dynamic in human sexuality. I think this is probably maybe one of the more taboo parts of what masculinity is, but like typically that the male is in a sexually dominant role and the female is in a more submissive role. I'm not talking about kink or weird stuff or anything. I'm talking about, kind of like normal uh, sexuality, that the male tends to be more dominant,
Mhm,
and the male desire, the intensity of the male desire. Again, not doing anything weird, not like I'm not talking
mhm,
about hitting, I'm not talking about physical violence or anything, but there's an intensity to the male desire that actually breaks through
mhm,
the barriers between the two people and allows a type of merger or a type of connection that is really needed for both people to have sexual release, but to also have bonding.
mhm,
But carrying that desire, carrying that super intense desire, which you both partners need it in order for the bonding to happen, but like it's a hard thing to live with.
mhm,
It's like you don't want to kill it. We can't, I think like people do, I think increasing like with pornography or like withdrawal from relationships, I think there are a lot of men who are like, I'd just rather not have this because it's
mhm,
burdensome to have all this. But it's so then we think something's missing, and I think there's not the gratification and the connection, and I think it ends up being a problem. But it's hard to carry that type of desire, and it has like and it's but it's valuable.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, thank you for fleshing that out a little bit. And, when you're talking about that adult role of responsibility, the father, the head of the household, that's the person that people tell when the pipe is leaking, or, that's the
Yeah,
person
yeah,
who
yeah.
carries.
That's a good example.
And I've been the wife who tells the husband that. In fact, I was that wife like a week ago when there was a pipe leak. And I've also been the single mother who is the last line for that kind of responsibility. And it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to be the one who's ultimately responsible. And I wonder if some of the difficulty between men and women that we see in the sort of philosophical discussions that are going on online, these thought trends and exploration trends, if some of that is just fear of growing up, period, full stop, for men and for women. I mean, you've seen this drop in childbirth, so more people are remaining childless, and we see the divorce rate going up. I don't know if there's a trend that indicates that marriage is on the decline, but I wouldn't be terribly surprised based on some of the things that we hear people saying. And
Right.
the men's movements, the men going their own way movement, which says, I'm not going to deal with that. I'm not going to deal with the problems that are associated with relationships with women. And the demonization of men from women that says that women don't need to deal with the problems associated with men. Like the quote about the fish and the bicycle, you know that one, probably.
No.
What is it? A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. So that
Oh,
was really
right.
popular even a long time ago. These kinds of like, we
Right.
don't need each other. And so you got that on both sides. And how much of that is just a desire? How much is that sort of an extended failure to launch? Like we might launch, we might get out and do things, but do we ever really take that helm? And and where does that come from? Where along the way have people started to, if they have started to, lose the will to lead and to be shoulder that kind of responsibility?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So there's kind of like a general like desire not to grow up, and that's like compounded with um um
Well, that's a projection onto the other as
right,
that
right.
source of burden, really. The
I
source of
want
that burden.
the other person to carry the burdens of adulthood so that I don't have to, and they're
Maybe so.
not. And um yeah, yeah. I mean, I think yeah, so they're not wanting to mature, and that's feeding into anger at the opposite sex.
I would say maybe like the women's resentment of men, maybe you could and anything we say is just going to be kind of a rough sketch, not
Right. Sure.
not really trying to embody specifics, but you could say women have been told you need to get a job, get an education so that you don't have to depend on a man. The underlying assumption being that men are not dependable. They will leave you, they will cheat on you, they will let you down. And there's such a high likelihood of that that it's responsible for you to set yourself up in a position to where you're not able to be let down because you've got this. So that's the you go girl, career woman kind of, even if you do have kids, you're set to be the single mom if need be. You're set up. But also, the problem is I cannot, I guess that one conceptualization might be I cannot take my place, my role in a relationship as wife because I'm going to be asked to take on more than what is fair in that role.
Mm,
And you're going
yeah.
to leave
Right.
me holding your job and my job, and I'm going to get screwed. And the other
Right.
way around
Right.
would be the men's argument of family court disenfranchisement that you marry a woman and you have a family with her, and she's kind of a gold digger who just mooches off of your labor. And then when eventually she loses, she doesn't have sex with you, so you're working more than you should, and you're
Right.
not given the joy of marital connection like you're describing. And
Right.
then ultimately you're left holding a big child support debt while she spends most of the time with the kids anyway, because she leaves you and you're taken to the cleaners and you don't even get the
Yeah,
benefit of the
yeah.
family. So both sides are basically making an argument that says, I don't trust you. If I engage with you, I'm going to be left with a burden of more than my fair share. And you're going to take away the benefits that would have come with a trustful and trusting engagement between the two of us, where we, I mean, and there's a great leap of faith in a marriage because you're saying we're going to come together and we're going to establish all of the things that are good in life under one umbrella together, and it's going to be the umbrella of us. It's going to be we're going to put up the house.
Right,
This is
right,
our
right,
house, and
right,
everything within it is us, but
right.
we're sort of codependent in this function because none of this functions without both of our buy-in. And so now we have this increasing wariness on both sides saying, I just don't trust that I'm not going to be holding the
Yeah,
bag on this.
yeah, and I think like well, I mean, some of this has to do with modernity. I mean, I do think these things are like really overdetermined. I mean, the economy is changing so much. I mean, who knows what the economy is going to look like in 10 years with AI and everything? Where are we going to be? I think for amidst that, it's really hard to have like inherited social norms about
Mhm.
what men and women do and don't do and what seems basically fair to us as a culture. Like we can't settle on that because everything is constantly in such flux
Mhm.
with like just massive technological shifts that are constantly happening. And so because everything is constantly in flux that way, every couple is constantly having to renegotiate what gender roles are, what feels fair. And that whole process is just ripe for escalation and fights and arguments
Mhm.
about disagreements and bitterness. And so that's why it's like, even if it's a bad deal, like I think a lot of people would take a bad deal for their sex if it meant that there are kind of norms where it's like, okay, you do ABC, I do EFG, we drop it,
Mhm.
and this is just the way marriage looks. I think there's a lot to be said for like having something like that. But it's not really like we couldn't possibly do that because like when all of us have Optimus robots in 10 years, it's like all going to be displaced by something else. And so, because the Optimus robot is going to do it. So I don't know what we're going to, but but I think like the the most toxic element of it is the negation of men's experience, which happens at such an organized institutional level. I
Mm.
mean, I do know, like, I can speak as a man that there are ways when a relationship gets going that all of these increasing demands get put on the man. You got to show up here. You got to text me this time. You got to do this. You got to take me here. You got to spend money on this. You got to do that, and it's like your time and your energy and your money and stuff is just gone. And it's like, and then you're kind of told that you're the one with all the privilege. And it's like, I've been in a relationship before. It's like it wasn't ever I do whatever I want and she's my slave.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe Andrew Tate gets that or whatever, but like I don't have that. I mean, and it's like so it's like all these demands. I really think about one thing that I think is really super interesting is we have this mythology that men are terrible partners.
Mm.
They really don't do fucking anything for these in relationships. They're just awful. Women are amazing partners. They're so good. They're so great at being a partner. Men are terrible. So if that were true, you would think women would want to use the men for sex and not want the burden of being with this terrible person in a relationship. And you would think men would really want that relationship where they get everything and not just want to take the sex. The behavior is opposite from the ideology. To me, and I know there's lots of reasons why that could be. It's not like I don't want to be overly, but it is an indication that the mythology that the men aren't contributing to the relationship and the man gets whatever he wants and the woman doesn't get what she wants. It's not true. I
Hmm.
don't think that's true. And I think a lot of the mythology, especially the way Hollywood tells stories about gender, the way they describe men and fathers, it's so it's just like not what people's lives are like. And I think that really throws dialogue off base. I think it even not even dialogue, like it throws our consciousness off base, where like we're so immersed in a certain ideology of men are men are Homer Simpson. They're all dumb, evil, stupid, bad parents. They're bad partners. They're terrible. They get whatever they want. They're so privileged. Women are hardworking and smart and great partners. And it's like we have this rigid narrative around what it is that is just obviously what people are not. Yeah, I'm not saying nobody experiences something like that, but it's obviously just really far away from what most relationships are. That it's like we're we're blind. A lot of people are blind to what's happening right in front of them about and I think like have like frustrations that they can't articulate and have like a feeling blamed or not valued or their needs not being met or devalued or whatever it is that they can't articulate. And I think it's almost like our consciousness is thrown out of sync with what our feelings are because this ideology is so thick. And then that's partly why I think the reactions against it are they haven't, I don't think they've matured. I don't think the responses against this ideology have really matured. I think they're kind of like paroxysms of, they're just out there. A lot of them are just like, well, fuck you too, or I hate you, or I don't
Hmm.
care, or it's like it hasn't really kind of been fully articulated as like these are all the ways that our stories that we're telling about relationships are wrong. And I think it actually like it happens less in fiction. I mean, I did you ever read Unbearable Lightness of Being?
Oh my
Did you ever-
gosh, one of my favorite books. Yeah.
But that woman who he ends up with, I hope I'm not spoiling too much there, but the main character ends up with this woman who really by being so dependent on him and fragile just totally breaks him and controls him.
Hmm.
And by being weak and playing the weak card, and like maybe even fully being a hyper fragile person,
Hmm.
she totally controls him. And it seems like maybe even I think not entirely clear how that this was the case, but maybe even like keeps him in a relationship that he's shouldn't be in and
Hmm.
isn't good for him. Like she just totally controls him through this. And it's like I fiction has the ability to articulate dynamics like that people live out that you don't it's just it doesn't seem like what Hollywood's interested in, where the man always has to be the bad guy and the woman always has. But the way that women can use sex to control men, they can use fragility, they use kind of guilt and shame dynamics. They can do all of these things, and I've been in that situation where then all of a sudden I'm carrying all the groceries and I'm doing all this stuff for her all the time and I'm running around and I realize none of my needs are being met, and somehow I'm still framed as the privileged one who gets whatever I want
Hmm.
and I'm not getting anything I want.
Hmm.
And if you try to raise that, it's a fight or something. I mean, and I think the crazy thing too is like on these interpersonal, social, emotional dynamics in relationships. My experience, women run circles around men. They're just like running circles around them. And the guy is struggling to articulate why he feels like depleted and not supported and he doesn't have a voice. But it'll come out in an angry outburst and then he's like shamed. It's like you're
Hmm.
angry and bad, and that shows how bad you are. So now you have to do more for me. And like I just like, and it's like one of the sad things about I think couples counseling in particular, but maybe psychotherapy as a whole, is how incredibly valuable it could be for men in exactly that situation where they could articulate how their needs aren't being met, how they're being taken advantage of. They can name these dynamics in a constructive and more effective way so that they're not in that situation. But so much of the literature and the training in the field does the opposite. It
Mhm.
just kind of falls onto these cliches that the male is always privileged. But it could be if these, if they men were to be more psychologically minded and emotionally skilled, they could potentially, be better partners and more constructively assertive in ways that really worked for
Mhm.
them, and probably, I think, could lead to better marriages and more sustainable families. It's like it's not good to have these paradigms dominating relationships. I think because when men can't articulate what they feel and their needs aren't being met and they're frustrated and feeling devalued, a lot of the times they're going to leave, they're going to cheat, they're going to drink, they're going to become violent or something. Not to excuse all those behaviors as caused by women, which I don't think is the case, but like it can contribute to that type of thing, I think.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's so interesting. It's so true that we have this official sort of professional and educational attitude, excuse me, that allows for the denigration of men, masculinity, and never allows for the critique of the feminine or of women. And that's something that you asserted early on in this discussion, but I'm kind of wanting to come back to it because I think that that's very interesting that we've allowed it to get there. And I wonder if it's sort of an offshoot of chivalry because there's so
Right,
much,
right.
and I'm sorry, I'm going to cough again. I'll mute real
No,
quick.
that's good.
Excuse me. Um, we there's so much asymmetry in men's and women's drives, needs, abilities. There's this fundamental asymmetry, and we used to call women the weaker sex. So there's so much fundamental asymmetry in the strengths and weaknesses of each sex and of the sort of drives and needs. You just talk about the sex drive, right? And how men have a stronger sex drive. It's
Or it's of a different nature. It
of a
has
different
like I think it
nature.
has a forcefulness to it that like it has an intensity to it
Well,
that
and
is,
men's
yeah.
life is different. Men's life patterns are different than women's life patterns. Women are very
Yes.
phasic.
Yeah.
The menstrual cycle means that you are at the mercy of different hormonal influences that
Right.
phase around a month. And so just like it's not women hate to be told, "Are you on your period?" when
Right,
when
right,
she's
right.
getting upset about something. But there's some truth in it that she'll be more sensitive at different points in her cycle, and then she'll be more passionate and sexual at different points in her cycle, and she goes through phases, whereas the hormonal profile for men is more steady and more elongated. So they're just subject to different uh, physical, biological impulses. And and uh, I think that there's a lot about human nature that's really beautiful and interesting, and it sort of defies institutional framing because we want to make things easy and cut and dry and simple and one size fits all. And life is so much messier than that. And when you apply some like chivalrous principles to institutional teachings, which basically says put the weaker person before yourself. Suppress the strength in order to support the weaker.
The thing that's like interesting about what you're saying about like um calling women the weaker sex, for example,
Hmm.
like which I think most people would reject as sexist right now, but women play the card that they're
Hmm.
weaker and need help in order to get what they want sometimes. And then when that is not serving them to be seen as weaker and they want to be seen as just as strong or stronger, they play that card. That's part of why men are being having circles run. Like when they want to play the weaker card and get care and some special treatment, they get special treatment. And when they want to play the card of I'm just as strong, they get that access. So it's kind of like I think there's a lot of like women kind of having their cake and eating it too. And like, but what gets shut out is like, what's the male experience of that? I have to give care and protection to you whenever you want it, but not when you don't. And whenever you want equality, you have to have that too, but never too much, but only when you want it and what you want. And it's like, and I don't get valued for being stronger and providing care when you need that. I don't actually get valued for being stronger that can't even be acknowledged, but you still get it. And
Hmm.
I don't get credit, but I have to do it. And if I don't do it, I'm cruel, but I don't get credit. Like it's like there's a lot of these like I think that stuff I think it's just hit a breaking point where it's like people can't keep doing it anymore. And
Hmm.
it's like if you want to be weaker and you want to cry and you cry and you get help and you act weak and you get cared for and like you know you want kid gloves, you don't want the full, you know. That's fine, but like you got to give credit for where credit's due of like I am stronger, I am going easy on you and I'm taking care of you and like you get the benefit of that, but at least give me credit for doing that and for being the stronger one when you need that.
Hmm.
And don't like act like that's not there. But it's like that in a lot of different ways. And I think like again, when men feel outclassed by these kinds of arguments where you can't win, um, the response is cheat, withdraw, leave, you know, drink, become aggressive. I think it's those types of things. And then, but those are not typically treated empathically as like that he's withdrawing because he can't win and his needs are never going to get met. And so why try? You know, it's not, it's like, oh, he's withdrawing because he's male and privileged and fragile, and men are like that, and men are terrible, and aren't they awful? And it's like, there's not empathy for it.
Hmm.
And that's something that's this, it's so frustrating because this is something that like clinical psychology in particular could be so helpful at improving communication and understanding on in ways that really helped if it wasn't just piling on to the trendy cliches around gender that it typically does. It could be so valuable to the world.
Oh, I want to say something, but I'm worried I'm going to start coughing again. This cough is driving me nuts. I think there, and I've got a cough drop in my mouth now, so sorry for the garbly sound, but it's better than me hacking into the mic. So, I uh I think that all of those things, those aspects of the asymmetry in relationship, they make sense if there's high optimism in a long-term relationship. Like, all right, so sorry, this is a little choppy because I'm getting over a cold. So thank you all for bearing with little edits here and there. Um, but you were saying how people would be upset or women might be upset to be described as the weaker sex. And yet, in so many ways, it's true that they just are. I mean, it's just we look
Well,
at
no,
the we look at like the and you talk about how kind of want to play both sides of it, right? And I think that's the important point. But you see the controversy right now over trans uh, identified males in female sports. That's a really big
right.
deal. So there's this physical disadvantage that women have. Plus, they also bear the burden of the phasic, cyclical nature of their bodies, as well as childbearing, having the pregnancy, having breastfeeding, all these things that really do make a woman physically more dependent and vulnerable. And the burden on a man of having a wife or a partner who goes through those things and requires a lot more of him, it is something that if we have a high optimism in marriage, and if we have a high likelihood that the commitments are really long-term and lifelong, over the lifetime, that pays out for both partners, for him because he receives the nurturing and the stability of the home and the relationship with wife and children. He gets to rear his children, see them grow up. So over the lifetime of these partners, it really makes sense. But if we view marriage as these short-term relationships where we're just getting what we can get out of it, then it's a raw deal for, I mean, in all the ways that you described for a man, and it can be a raw deal in a lot of other ways for a woman. So I think so much of this comes down to cynicism. And if we live in a time when people are very cynical about their prospects and they really don't have, they're very pessimistic about the likelihood of finding a partnership that establishes here and goes on until the end of one's life. If we don't feel like that's possible, then we're just looking at all the potential ways that we can be hurt and that we're going to be gypped by this by a potential relationship.
Yeah. Well, and there's lots of reasons why relationships are probably more likely to end. I mean, with a lot of this stuff too, it is worth thinking about. They're very multi-determined. I mean, the cynicism itself is going to weaken the relationship. If you're trying to get the most out of it because you think it's not going to last, then it's much less likely to last. I think with relationships not lasting, there's a lot of things like just generic stuff. Again, it might be related to technology, but just like people live longer. It's a different thing to think about spending your life with somebody when you think you're going to die in your 50s or
Mhm.
60s versus your 90s. That's a long time. And so your kids are adults, they've moved out of the house or whatever, and you still got 40 years left of life potentially. And you could meet somebody and have a 30-year relationship. It's like, so that's a strain. I mean, another thing is like, I think people expect a ton out of the relationships. It's probably because other social functions, like other social glue, is so much weaker. Like if you were in a community that was more people who lived in communities that were more robust, they'd be getting a lot of their needs from lots of people, and their partner is one person. But if they're the only thing you got, and it's like, it's not even just like they're filling your interpersonal needs. For a society without religion, your partner is like your religion.
Mhm.
Like, it's like, this is your meaning in life is like family, and they need to meet all your needs. They need to like, it's like it. And so it's like, it's very much like overloaded. And the other thing is, it's very easy to like get divorced and date other people. I think it's like, so it does, it's not like maybe in another era where if I get divorced, I'll be socially ostracized. How am I going to make it? It's kind of like if you get divorced, you get on the app, you'll have a date next week. It's pretty wild to think about how easy it is to to do that. And that weighs on people. That's just like in the background. So I don't know, I don't know how to reset all of this. It's like it feels incredibly daunting to kind of like figure out how everyone in society is going to want to have a relationship that's as fulfilling as they want it to be, that lasts their whole life and is like
Mhm.
it's kind of weird what people would think like, oh, you're a therapist, like you should know this. You should know how to have like perfectly fulfilled relationships forever with people. I sadly we haven't figured it out yet, but
No, it's true. And I think that we have we've attained such a level of comfort relative to,
yeah.
say 100 years ago. We can do so much more. We can have so much more ease. And I think that we apply that to everything. I think that we have this drive towards perfection where we're not able to
Yeah.
tolerate the discomforts and the sacrifices.
And the choice could really be making people miserable.
Hmm.
I mean, because it's like there's so much choice. You really, with the internet, you have access to the entire world. And like to kind of be like before where it's like it was really your tribe or like maybe some neighboring tribes that you could
Yeah,
like find somebody in
your
either your
reference
tribe or
group.
a neighboring tribe, but like it was going to be there weren't a ton of tribes, and you had to kind of take what you could get.
Mhm.
So now it's like, I don't know. There's always somebody else. And what about that person? And what about this? And oh, maybe if I had waited longer, I could have had this thing. Or
Mhm.
what a head fuck.
Well,
And
that
it's like,
reminds me
yeah.
of Milan Kundera too, because that's one
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
quotes from
yeah.
that book was something, I'm going to get it wrong, but it's having only one life to live, we cannot know what our other options would have been. We don't get the chance to live out multiple lives because we
And
only
his
get this
like,
one.
yeah, and his attempt to do that by like having as many lovers as he possibly could
Hmm.
to like, and how like disgusting it was.
Hmm.
But like, yeah, that's such a good book. Anyway,
It is.
um,
Well, thank you for this discussion.
okay.
And thank you for people listening because I did have a coughing fit in the middle of it. So hopefully we were able to stay kind of on track, and I'm going to clip a couple pieces out where I'm coughing. But you gave me a really good prompt for me to ask you for our next conversation, or one of our upcoming ones, about choice making people miserable. So I think that's a really interesting avenue to go down.
Great.
But thanks for
Okay.
sharing your
I
thoughts
love
on
that.
this issue. I really enjoyed it.
Me too.
All right.
Okay. Talk to you soon.